Hey folks, Matt Gladman here with another drawing tutorial. And today I'm going to show you how I made this fantasy map. But before we get started here, please, if you like what you're seeing, subscribe, like, or comment on this video. This tutorial is going to be jam-packed. We're going to sketch out the continent. We're going to draw coastlines, mountains, forests, towns. And once we get it all sketched out, we're going to ink it in. All right, we got a full fantasy map we got to get started on. So let's go sketch. Okay, so I'm laying out my workspace here, and this time I'm gonna work within the borders of a circle. And then I lay out the shape of my continent. So I'm going through with pencil, and I'm just laying out the rough shape and design. I'm trying to keep it free and kind of random, but at the same time a little bit controlled. As I cut in for bays, inlets, and other areas where the land meets the ocean. Some folks like to use rice or beans for laying out the shape or structure of their continent, but I'm gonna keep it nice and clean and just go for it. After that, I started running the shape of the rivers and some of the lakes that I see. And just like all rivers, these are going to lead to the ocean from lakes or the mountains. And that's sort of the general shape I'm going to be working with of the main landform. I've got my winding lines for rivers and a couple spots for lakes, and they all feed out into the ocean. Now I'm just sort of plotting out where I see the cities, villages, and other areas. So I'm just making some light circles of where I want them to be. Most of them near some sort of water, whether it's a coast or a lake or a river. All right, now for the mountains. I'm laying out this really jagged line here, and that'll be what the mountain range follows. And then I'm just sort of finessing some, and then I'm just sort of fine-tuning some of the peaks here, making them a little more vertical. And then I shape them with ridges that kind of swoop downwards. Anywhere that there's a bit of a peak or a corner, we're gonna run our lines off that. The longer the line, kind of the higher the mountain, and the shorter the line, the smaller the mountain. And then I go through with a bit of shading on the left-hand side. Not that there's gonna be much shadow work on this map, but the left side is gonna be where my shadows are. And then more mountains. These ones being more coastal mountains. For the first ones I did, more inland that run along the interior of the continent, creating a mountain pass with a river flowing through it. I'm just trying to think of the creation of this continent, where some of the pieces were pushed together and upwards for mountains, and also creating crevices for rivers. And then I'm just sort of doing a double line to create the general shape of these rivers. After that, I'm working on the roadways, the paths between each town or settlement. But I'm just trying to think of the most logical way that these towns would be connected by road. And now, let's lay out our first city. And for this one, I'm following one of my earlier tutorials that I did on castles. This is gonna be my 2D, kind of classic looking castle. If you haven't seen that video, I would suggest watching it and checking it out where I break down how I draw this castle. But anyways, that's what I'm drawing here. So I just lay it out in pencil and get the general outline of it. After, I'm going in and I'm laying out some of the buildings that are on the outside of the castle walls. Because in my mind, this is going to be one of the biggest cities or settlements on this map. So I want to make it look sprawling. I also made a full tutorial video on how I do houses and towns. So if you want a more in-depth guide on how I do that, make sure to check out that video as well. Then I sort of fill it in with some of the nearby forests and woods. And in this bay here, that's where I'm going to create the port. And for all my ports, I'm gonna lay out kind of a little boat icon that represents kind of the style and design of each settlement, whether it's human or elf or dwarven. Each port will look a little unique that way with this ship icon. And for this one, it's gonna be kind of a classic looking galley. And then I lay out the harbor for the port by sketching out a dock and some of the boathouses. Around the edge of the continent, I'm gonna lay out these sort of ripples, just to accentuate that, hey, this is the coastline here. Next, I'm moving on to an elven city, and this one's kind of stylized with elven architecture and design. I'm thinking sort of whimsical, wood elf style. And then I'm moving on to the farming village in the grasslands, with the straw roofing and the farm fencing. I really give it that rural look. And now I've got my dwarven city that's nestled high within the mountain range here. And I want this to kind of look like a stone dwarven fortress, only really accessible by ascending this massive stone staircase upwards. Then on the east coast, I've got this oriental looking human village here. I thought this would be a fun way to switch up a human settlement, especially considering that it's on the eastern side. I thought, why not go with an eastern influence? And then of course, we can't forget our fishing village. So here I've got this really simple rural fishing village, basic huts and straw roofing, making the structures in this town really look like salty sea shanties. And now off to the marshy woods, I've got my elven treehouse village. As I sketch out platforms that'll be high up within the canopy of the trees. I'm thinking this will be a village amalgamated with many magical races, whether it's elves, halflings, gnomes, fairies, anything with a bit of a magical tinge to it. They'll all feel right at home here. And for a little bit of marshy flair, we've got some mushroom houses too. And here we have our elegant high elf city made of marble and crystal, with towering spires and an ancient palace. Located in the barren plains, we've also got our desert city with sandstone structures. And last, we have our northernmost settlement. It's a rugged, frostbitten village nestled at the very edge of the continent. We've got longhouses and smaller huts built from sturdy timber. It's surrounded by evergreens and enclosed by stout wooden palisades. It very much has a Viking influence, if you couldn't tell, especially by the boat in the harbor. And then around the map, I wanted to put these designated camping areas. These could be areas for safe refuge for the adventurers on their travels. So I went around and put these in various areas just off the main pathways and roads. And let's not forget some mines. I wanted to place a few select mining areas, maybe if the players wanted to gain some resources or go adventuring in the dark depths of these caverns. And now I'm just going in and laying out some of the details of each little biome. Here in this desert, I'm laying out deep fissures within the landscape. This area just north of Soulport is going to be one of the biggest forests on the continent. So I started by laying out the rough borders of it. Then I went in and laid out most of the trunks facing us. After that, I'm laying out all the canopies of the trees along the bordering edge. It's tedious and time consuming, but it looks great in the end. I like to write out the location names as I go so that I have enough room for them and I don't have to squeeze them in the end. Luckily, I have decent handwriting, so I'm going to take advantage of that and use a serif style script with small accents or extensions at the end of the longer strokes of each letter. You can also scan your map with your phone or printer in the end and add it in digitally. That's an option too. I'm just sketching out the rough treetops here. We don't need to fill it all in because negative space will do that, as long as we throw a little bit of texture in for the canopy of the treetops. I almost forgot about the sandy dunes of the desert, so let's get those in there. But then it's back to filling in all these gaps with thick forest. This forest, I'm switching it up a little bit. So where I've got some more rounded treetops like maple or oak trees, I'm also throwing in some more vertical looking treetops with like a birch or something like that. Where the roads meet the rivers, I'm adding in these little bridge icons here. If there isn't a bridge icon, players are gonna have to ford the river to get across. Now filling in the swampy marsh area, I'm going for willow trees here. They'll really sell the look and aesthetic of a swampy marsh. To really give it that sprawling metropolis vibe, I'm connecting Soulport and Soulholt with a bunch of little structures in between the harbor and the castle walls. I'm just creating a little bit of variety with multi-level buildings and then smaller homes. And for the northern forest, again, we're going to be using a mixture of trees, but to give it that northern vibe, I'm mainly going to be using evergreens, like cedar, pine, or fir trees, but mixed in a small amount of deciduous trees just to keep the variety there. And along the coastlines, in addition to those kind of wavy shapes, I'm also adding in some small dot work to give them that pebbled beach sort of look. And jumping back over the marshy area, I'm filling in the Farron Woods. And this I want to look like a thick, lush forest filled with magic and mystery. So I'm kind of mixing in those willow trees with other styled trees. And now the really satisfying part. We're gonna ink this epic map in. So at first I thought I'd use this bowl to get that circle border perfect, but that didn't work out too well. So I scrapped it and went in by hand. It was tough and I had to do it in sort of segments, but it turned out all right. And hey, this is a hand-drawn map. Some of those rough edges give it some character, right? So I just took my time and carefully traced over the pencil work. And just like everything we're gonna do with pen, you just follow those pencil guidelines, but try to keep it nice and clean. I mostly just use one pen with the one thickness, and then it's sort of the pressure that I apply that gives me the desired thickness I need. But occasionally I'll switch it up to an 01 or an 02 for some thicker bordering lines. Okay, let's rock and roll with inking this in. Here we go. Let's follow where the pencil takes us. And hey, if we go off the guidelines a little bit, that's totally fine. The ink is what's gonna stick around, so we just gotta make the ink look good. Like I always say, this is tiny work with minute, small strokes. So hey, it's not gonna be perfect, but that's totally fine. Again, that's what gives these maps character. Most of the human settlements landing on the points of a compass, North Seoul, East Seoul, West Seoul, and the metropolis being Seoul, I wanted to carry that theme over. So we're calling this continent Seoul Haven. And folks, I am beyond stoked at how this turned out. It was an epic map. I think all in all, it took me 4 hours to complete this. From sketching it in with pencil to refining it in ink. And that's not too bad for a big project like this. All right, that turned out pretty sweet. So please, subscribe, like, or comment on this video. Let me know what you want to see me draw. All right, until next time.